So welcome to my next free lecture, and I'm releasing this one early because I feel so bad that I haven't finished my How to Design book yet, and I had to push it into trying to finish it next year. So in the meantime, I'm going to share with you this lecture that I did actually a couple of years ago, and it's about proximity-based styling opportunities, and it will be the basis of one of the chapters in my How to Design book. So I hope you enjoy it. Okay, so moving on. So you've done all your research, you have a story or a scenario that you want to design your vehicle around or towards, and you've decided on your package, the function of the vehicle. That's all very clear, and now it comes time to do the styling of the vehicle. And the approach I like to use is this thing I call proximity-based styling opportunities, and it's really just a series of gates or check points based on proximity. That's where the name came from. So it's really, if you're far away from an object, you don't see very much of it, i.e. details, textures, things of that nature. So I really have broken down eight categories based on sort of seeing an object from a distance. Then as you walk closer to the object, you see more and more about it. And so that's how it's going to progress. And so I'm going to take you through the 8 categories. And again, it will become more clear, hopefully. But these are 8 things that are in priority of distance and getting closer, but it doesn't mean that one can't override the other. So they're not set in stone, and we'll look at many examples. So the first one is silhouette, proportion, and stance. So if we pop over here, see how this works. And we look at an object from a distance. Let's see if I can find one here from a distance. Actually, that's not too bad. So when we look at an object, actually let's go back to that first one, and we see the silhouette of an object. So if it's a light object against a dark background, of course the silhouette's going to be stronger. But really, if you look at this car over here, even through the fence, right, or that building way in the distance, right, we really see just the silhouette. And we also see what the second topic is, which is the value graphics. Now, the reason that I think having categories is important is that, and there's a nice silhouette of that propeller, is that it gives you a way to quantify the nature of objects and the way that objects look. So you can apply these categories to design, but also to making images, so to drawings, renderings, etc. And if something's not working at a certain level, right, say from a distance when the object is small, then see there would be actually a poor silhouette, right? It's great, low contrast is silver against this gray building. Here's a little bit stronger, like this wing, especially this light wing against a dark shadow. Actually, this car is a pretty strong silhouette, right? Because again, it's generally very light against a darker background. So it makes it very easy to pick out the car. When you're doing game vehicles, it's important to have a strong silhouette because you need to be able to identify the vehicle very, very quickly. Also in the case of doing things for movies, so the classic example would be a TIE fighter versus an X-Wing. It's basically X versus H, right, in front view. And so you can make a snap decision, you can see what vehicle it is and tell immediately. So proximity-based styling opportunities, I just see them as gates. And what I like to do is make sure that each category is as strong as it can be back to the scenario that I've been given or the story. So if I'm making sure that each one along the way is sort of all that it can be, in the end it usually adds up to a strong design, sort of at all viewing distances. So the second one I call value graphics. So value graphics are, let's look at some examples. Simply put, it's the light and dark of an object, and it's not about really the form of an object, it's really just the graphics. So if I go look at an object here, this would be an example of value graphics, the yellow tail, right, the rudder, and these ailerons and the right elevator there, versus the white of the fuselage. Also, again, looking at the distance, this vehicle, the windows and the tires, right, those would be strong value graphics because it's high contrast. Weak value graphics would be where it was low contrast. It's kind of a blurry picture, but it actually represents, or hopefully represents my point a little clearly here, is that it doesn't matter if it's an object that has value, like these, right, cylinders coming out of here, the engine poking out through the holes, or if it's actually a hole that creates the value. If you squint your eyes, they become the same thing, right? They become graphics and they have shapes. And so those shapes that are created by the value graphics are really important. If we look here, right, we see the, of course, literal graphics. We'll get to that, but it really doesn't matter if it's a hole. There's a hole, right? But there's also a painted black surface. If you squint your eyes, they're the same thing. It really doesn't matter. So look at this one. Here's a really strong example of these value graphics. Windows and big, these are sometimes called like super graphics on buildings, and you know, they're so dominant. They take over the really the design in a lot of ways. And so you need to pay special attention to these because they're very strong design opportunities and a great time to do styling. So the window shapes, right? So if we have a white object with a dark window, the value graphics are going to become much more important. If you have a black limousine, for instance, and you have a black tinted window on a black painted car, the value graphics are really not important, right? Because it's very hard to make out the window shape. But if that vehicle is going to be offered in a different lighter value color with a dark window, right, then if you hadn't paid attention to and spent time designing the shape of the window graphic, it's going to stand out. So if you know for sure what the final values are of your object, then you can sort of skew one way or the other and spend your time appropriately. But if you know that it's going to be white in this case, then special attention needs to be put into the window shapes, right? The graphics, exhaust pipes where they overlap onto the white, they all become simply value graphics. So I think that it's another opportunity to design holes, graphics themselves, windows, right? Tires against a lighter body. Again, there's a car. If I look way in the distance, right? Again, a sort of proximity-based approach. The wheel wells and the tires and the windows and the tail light, because it's darker, make for fairly strong value graphics. And if I hadn't spent time designing those things, I would lose the opportunity to draw the viewer and the audience closer to the object. So a lot of this comes from, here's another nice, that hole creates a value graphic, comes from industrial design, where a customer walks into a store for the first time and you have a bunch of products on the back wall of the store, let's say shoes, for instance, or bicycle helmets, anything. And you're trying to draw the customer to your company's shoe, the one that you designed for that company. So you need to use these tools to pull people towards the object. And this, I think, sort of stems out of that. So the first thing you can use, silhouette, and then the proportion of the object. Is it a caricature? Is it, you know, sleek, etc.? And then does it have an attractive stance? And stance I put into this first category because most objects, especially vehicles, ones that with wheels or that move around on water or ground, have a very strong relationship to a horizontal ground plane. So doing a car, for instance, without the wheels, for me, doesn't make a lot of sense. And to take it one step further, a car without wheels touching the ground creating a shadow makes even less sense, because the only way I can sell the stance of this car, right, is to see the distance of the body to the shadow. And whether you like it or not, the shadow is especially in California, the shadow is a companion to your object all the time, almost all the time. So knowing that, coming to grips with including it in your drawings and your renderings, it can really help to offset and really illustrate, I think, an attractive stance to an object. So I like to always include those in my sketches, and it helps to get the rake of the vehicle and make that more attractive. But without the shadow, you can't see the ground plane. But the ground plane's there, whether you like it or not. So next category is transitional form. So transitional form I put after value graphics, because if we look back at some of these images, let's pop back over here, and I like some of those sort of opportunities where we saw a couple of cars off in the distance. If I look at those, right, and squint my eyes, even this plane, right, this shows transitional form. Transitional form is basically any form that creates a gradation across a shape. So fillets, radiuses, convex surfaces, and concave surfaces. Any plane changes right across the surface will create a value change. And when you look at that vehicle, for instance, and I squint my eyes, I don't see much. And it's even white. If it was a darker value, I would even see less. So for me, transitional form is actually secondary to getting the silhouette correct and the value graphics correct. And if I can optimize those, then I can go in and render form. So let's look at just some nice examples of transitional form. Here's an example, right? It's the little step for this plate sitting on the fuselage, and then it's the bigger gradation in the core shadow and the cast shadow from this bigger air intake. So those would be transitional forms. Here are some nice transitional forms, a little lumpy, right, in some areas, etc. But that's the idea. It gives it volume, makes it look three-dimensional. But if I look at this plane and I prioritize how important are the transitional forms, i.e. the gradations across the surface, in this lighting scenario, they're pretty weak, right? We have a little highlight here, a little core shadow there, but not much plane changing across here. If I really squint my eyes, the silhouette is more important. And then second to that, I would say, or even before that, would be the value graphics of the window cutout, right, against the fuselage. That becomes really a strong element. And you can see that maybe this third window, right, would be a little sleeker if it was just cut up just a tick. But that becomes a way for me to prioritize. So I'm not going to worry about fillets, radiuses, big plane changes. Now, of course, if something is metallic, it's going to show the form much more strongly. That's why all the fifth-scale clay cars in automotive studios are painted, silver or gold or some form of metallic paint, because it shows the form much more strongly. So if it's metallic and you know your object's going to be metallic, then the attention paid to transitional forms can jump ahead of some of the other forms. But even if I squint my eyes, that wheel well is pretty strong. Same with this window breaking through here. So again, it's a balance, and depending on the object, you may end up with something that's what I would normally put category 6 will jump way up to the top. So they will just slide around. It just depends on the object, lighting, all of that sort of thing. So let's move on to my next category. So after transitional form, I like to think about line graphics. So line graphics would be, we started at the far side of the parking lot and we were looking at a white van, let's say, right? We saw the silhouette, proportion, stance. Value graphics would be window cutouts, wheel wells, things like that. So whether it's actually painted dark or a hole, it doesn't matter. They become visually the same thing. Then you move on to transitional form. Now, the thing is that transitional form is so dependent on the quality of the light that if you're relying entirely on the transitional forms of your object to make it attractive or interesting, and the game vehicle or real vehicle drives into a different environment, or it's a cloudy day and there's flat light, then it's going to be very difficult to see your transitional forms. And then if you haven't paid a lot of attention to number 1 and 2, a lot of the appeal of your vehicle has disappeared because it's so dependent on lighting. And also, if the object is offered in multiple colors, if it's black and it's not metallic, and it can change quite a bit. Line graphics. Line graphics are cut lines, so that would be door cuts, things like that. So here's an example of a line graphic. Okay, and I sort of have it after my bigger categories, but it's definitely there and definitely you need to pay attention to it and how it transitions across your transitional forms. So here, see how it wraps, does it cut through that point? No, it's given a little bit of room and the point happens after. A lot of times it's dictated by your package, of course, right? You have to have a door so people can get in and out of the vehicle. The door has to be of a certain size, and then the transitional form can happen usually, right, with some knowledge of where these open and closing lines are going to go. So they can not only be real part lines, they could just be design lines. So even though this is a transitional form, it's a little step, it sort of creates a line graphic as well. So right, because of the form change, it creates the line. Line graphics also exist around value graphics. It's really a big value graphic that creates a shape or an edge between two surfaces. Actually just saw this, glanced at this car in the background. Right, there's an nice example of value graphics. It's a black bumper, but these are black holes, but they do the same thing, right? They separate those surfaces. And it's same with her shorts, black and white, right? Checkers is an example of value graphics. Okay, let's move on. All right, infographics. Infographics exist on most vehicles and products, and they are things like the maker, right, the manufacturer of the object or the vehicle, the model number. Say it's a Ford F-150, right? Then there's the example. And then I also put in things like keyboards, on-off switches, things like that, user interface displays, all that sort of stuff is conveying information. And so these are, again, another opportunity of things to design and draw and should be on your objects. And again, it's another styling opportunity and really another gate, right? I don't want to really move on from these bigger topics, getting into smaller and smaller details that you really can't even see from a distance until each one of these, right, I'm satisfied that I've accomplished the goal for whatever the scenario is for the vehicle. Another big one, advertising. Advertising, and this is really in the case, really a great example would be race vehicles. This can really dominate and move all the way to the very top. And let's look at just a couple of examples of that. Right, so right here is a little badge, so that's probably the maker, and here's the model, right? So there's two examples on this vehicle, and then, right, there's another bit of information, so more information graphics. Military vehicles have a lot of infographics, right? Lots and lots of, rescue symbol here with the arrow and, pull this lever. When you get closer, there's even more information. Danger stripes, warning stripes, and, danger logos and air intake and directional arrows all over the place. So military vehicles are really a lot of fun, and they come to life in a lot of ways once you start to add those graphics. So back to this model, we can see really from a distance. There's a nice example of, it's not advertising, but it's sort of super graphics, if you will. But it's definitely informational graphics because we've got all these numbers and designators, right? It's a Navy plane. There's the call, and here's another Navy, right? There's the number. Usually some, country affiliation if it's a military vehicle or a rescue vehicle. More information graphics with value graphics, right? Again, it all sort of blends together, but it makes it easier for me to remember these things, right, if I have a strategy. And I have a list, basically. So here's some more. This is definitely advertising, right? And then, of course, if you're doing race vehicles, you've got to have some numbers. So here's the maker, Honda. You can even see it from a distance, maker of the engine in the case of this Indy car, right? And there's Camping World showing up. So that would be advertising graphics. This is covered in infographics. And really, if you took off all the infographics, it's really not going to sell as a military vehicle. So it's important to include those things. Okay, the next category I like to tackle would be materials. So again, another opportunity for styling. And let's see, the easy way to think about this would be, in the case of vehicles, think of a rubber black tire against a alloy wheel. There's an obvious material change there. The material change is very visible actually from a distance because of the value graphics, right? A light value wheel against a dark tire makes for strong value graphics. Same thing if you analyze a wheel and you look at a light value wheel that has holes, right? Those are value graphics created, right, by the value change across that surface. Really, not really because of transitional form, but because of a big hole and what's behind it. But there's a nice material change. The rubber tire against the lighter value wheel. Also material change here, which again is really more about a value shift. Same here. I think to think about chrome and leather. So think of a wristwatch. And those are things that can be quite visible from a distance. So that's why it's sort of above other topics. So there's some more material changes. There's a little material change there, a material change here. And right, material of course affects the reflectivity in a lot of cases, especially if you think of leather versus chrome, but can be pretty strong depending on your object. Okay, moving on. Let's get to color is next. So there's only 8 categories, and I've tried to, over the years, and really this came out of a lecture I did for my students last spring, a new class I'm teaching at Art Center. It was about design process and how to become a good concept designer. And so I really tried to look at all the past designs I've done, designs my friends do, and the objects around me, and see if I could classify everything about those objects from a styling perspective into the fewest categories as possible. So if you can think of another category, please by all means email me and help round out this list. But for now I only have 8, and I'm not trying to make it bigger. I'm trying to make sure that if I can, I'll squeeze it even more to keep it simple. So number 7 out of 8 is color. Now you might say, well, colors, that's really important. And if we look at this Indy car, what do we see first? Yeah, we see color, right? And that color is making it tells our brain what the object is, that everything that's red there is that Indy car. But I can't rely on the sex appeal or the attractiveness of my object to be only the fact that it's red. Okay, so that's why I don't classify color as very important from a styling perspective, because the next year or another model or the car might be offered in multiple colors. So if you relied entirely on the fact that I'm not going to worry about those other steps, I'm just going to make it red and that'll make it great, right? Well, it doesn't really work then when you go and paint the car yellow or it's black or white. And so I try to think about taking color out of the equation, mostly because I may not be the person picking the color, and it might be offered in multiples. A marketing person might do it. So a lot of times it's completely out of your control. So I don't then like to rely on that as my way to have a successful design. So let's just look. There's of course different colors, obviously, but I put it way down at the bottom of the list, almost at the bottom. The very last thing, and the last category, is texture. And the idea here is that we were, say, entering a room, we saw a chair across the room, we made a snap decision about is that chair going to be comfortable based on its silhouette and its proportion. Do I think I'm going to fit because of the certain size it might be? Does it look sturdy, right, based on its stance, or is it leaning a little bit? Were there any value graphics? If I look at something like a Herman Miller chair, a Steelcase chair, something that might be all just monochromatic, therefore no value graphics to worry about. So you can sort of cross that one off the list if you know the object's going to only be offered in one value. Transitional forms, well, really very reliant upon the light, but probably I can make out, what's the seat and what's the back sort of thing. But probably not going to draw me in so much from a distance. This is, I'm halfway across the room now and I start to appreciate the transitional forms. As I get closer, now halfway across the room, I also start to see the line graphics. Infographics, right? I got to get pretty close to see these things, of course, unless it's, advertising in some sort of a racing vehicle. And then the materials, sure, if it's rubber versus chrome, leather versus chrome, you could see that from quite a distance. Color, again, might be offered in multiples, so I don't like to rely on that. And then the very last thing, you're now is all the way up to the object to the point where you can touch it, and you actually can start to see the textures of the object. So this would be things like, right, little tire tread. You can count that as texture on a tire, and when you get up close, you'll see it. And then, molded in texture could actually be text. So it actually could be infographics on the side of a tire, but it's sort of more in the form of texture because it's molded in. So this will be like on the armrest or the interior of a vehicle, right? There's lots of textures that are molded into that. So those are my 8 categories. And I actually use those categories to design any object, not just vehicles. I know I'm trying to stay focused on vehicles, but you see I keep talking about an office chair, etc. But it's because it doesn't really matter what the object is. Once you have your scenario and your story, which is kind of the same thing, but or your design brief if you're an industrial designer. So you have your intent and your direction and what you've done your research. You have your hard points in your package, and now you get to the really fun part if you like to do styling. And I'm very logical, so I like to have these logical steps that I can evaluate a form, and I can start to draw and sketch or even use collage photography, 3D modeling, lump of clay, doesn't matter. Any pipeline or tools that you like to use. This is how I build any design, actually all my designs. So aliens, buildings, props, of course vehicles. I find that they all work. Okay, and of course it's like a big sliding scale, right? You could put a little meter on each one of these, and if it was depending on the object, if it was something that was going to be black and white, I'd better pay attention to my value graphics, right, in a big way. So a white limousine with black tinted windows. Better pay a lot of attention to that. Race vehicles, well, I better really, have a lot of nice advertising logos and spend a lot of time placing those across the form so that they look good. Line graphics are going to be overpowered on a race vehicle, right? Because a lot of them, they don't even have doors, or the doors have been sealed up. Take, for instance, like a stock car. And a stock car, you've really got to, spend a lot of time putting logos all over that thing to make it look realistic. And transitional form, incredibly difficult to see the transitional forms when you have logos all over it. So does it matter a lot? No, it really goes back to this: silhouette, proportion, and stance. So I hope that's helpful for you. We've got a couple more things we're going to talk about to finish up my lecture, but the lecture is really a lot of talking, not a lot of painting and drawing this time around. And I hope you find that helpful. So once again, there's my 8 steps, and we'll look at a few more topics to wrap up the lecture.